Hello and welcome to my channel Mains Gains. My name is Christian Quartermain and I am a student dietitian studying a master's degree in nutrition and dietetics at the University of Nottingham. I am also a qualified personal trainer. I am bringing you video content on the most up-to-date nutrition information that you can hopefully go away, apply to your own goals, whether that's fitness, health, weightlifting, powerlifting. I'll also, alongside this, be making certain workout videos, again, to help you reach your goals, whether it's in terms of weight loss, powerlifting, or hypertrophy. I'll also be adding in additional videos as well, looking more at the health aspects of nutrition. It won't just be specifically about fitness and weightlifting and building muscle. There'll be a whole variety of content coming on this channel in the future. So with that said, let's jump into today's episode. Today's episode is a continuation on a Metabolic Monday series. And this series is looking at key organs in energy metabolism. So last week we looked at the liver in a bit of detail. I did provide a contents page and we got through half of that. So today's episode is a continuation on with the liver part 2. The contents. So you'll have already seen this from the last video because you clearly watched the last video. This is just a general reminder of what we have covered and what we are going to cover now. So in the last video we looked at what and where the liver is situated, and we elaborated further on what the liver does in terms of its role in metabolism. We looked at, for example, how the liver responds to consuming food such as carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. And if you want to recap on that, I would suggest you go and rewatch the first part of this video before continuing on for the second part. What we are going to look at today, now that we have discussed how the liver responds to foods and macronutrients, is then once it goes through those processes, once it's stored in the body, the impact that this has on your body utilizing substrates. And what I mean by that is how the body reacts to physical activity. And then after we've looked at that, we will finally apply all of this information to your fitness goals. Throughout this video, I'm hoping that all this information you'll be applying anyway, because if there's things that you haven't known about or terms, or you haven't understood how the body works in processing these substrates, especially on this section here, I'm hoping that a lot of this information will be quite new to you, and you'll be able to take something away from it. So with all that said, let's jump into the first slide. The impact this has on your body utilizing substrates, brackets food. So the impact the liver has on your body utilizing macronutrients like carbohydrates, protein, fats. And we are looking at how your body, once it's kind of gone through those processes in the liver, how your body then utilizes them during physical activity, during something like running or weightlifting, whatever the type of exercise is. Point number 1. Glucose not stored in the liver's glycogen stores will be sent to the glycogen stores in skeletal muscle. Now, I think I touched on this on the first parts of the liver episode. So we consume a meal, it gets digested in the stomach, gets further digested in the intestines. The broken down carbohydrate turns into glucose. That glucose is sent to the liver via the hepatic portal vein. Once it's in the liver will process it. It will store it as glycogen. Once the liver cannot fit any more glucose in its stores, it will shift excess out into the blood circulation. That will be sent to muscle tissue, and then the muscle tissue will store that glucose in its skeletal muscle stores, in its glycogen stores in the skeletal muscle. Glucose is a predominant fuel source for your muscles to break down and use as chemical energy, especially during high intensity exercise. So during exercise, and when you'll be contracting different muscles during exercise, you have glucose ready to use. That's why it stores in your muscles. It goes through a process called glycolysis. It can go through other processes as well, depending on the type of exercise you're doing. If you're doing high intensity exercise, it will go only through glycolysis. So the glucose will go through a metabolic process called glycolysis, where it is broken down into chemical energy. That energy is known as ATP. If you are doing more aerobic exercise, it will go through the Krebs cycle, it will go through oxidative phosphorylation, and that'll provide more ATP than it would just going through glycolysis. When the glycogen stores in your muscles start depleting, glucose in the blood is transported to muscle tissue to be broken down and be used as energy. This is quickly made available for muscle to use. When you're exercising, obviously you are depleting your stores. So you'll be using glucose primarily, definitely to start with. If you're doing something like weightlifting, if you're doing, I don't know, squats, you'll be using a lot of glucose to power that movement, especially if it's got a lot of weight on the bar. Same as if you're running, you're going to use glucose as an energy source. That's going to start depleting. You're going to start running out of glucose. And what happens is you will always have a specific amount of glucose in the blood. There's always a concentration maintained in the blood, and that's there for when tissues need more glucose. So in this moment, in this instance, this example, your skeletal muscle is running low on glucose. So the blood will then send more glucose to the skeletal muscle for that to be used. What then happens is the glycogen stored in the liver is broken down, and that is used to replenish the glucose in the blood, because there needs to always be a specific amount of glucose in the blood. There needs to be a range, a very small range, but it needs to be maintained, that amount of concentration in the blood. And obviously if you're sending off glucose from the blood to the muscle, then that glucose in the blood needs to be replenished, and that's when the glycogen stored in the liver is broken down, it's dephosphorylated, and then that's sent back into the circulation. Another thing that happens is fatty acids also begin being mobilized. So when you are working out, if you are working out for long periods, you will shift between using glucose as an energy source as well as fat. It does depend on the intensity level. You will use fat during more aerobic, lower intensity exercise or moderate intensity, whereas during high intensity exercise you will solely use glucose as your fuel source. When glycogen stores are depleted, the intensity of your performance levels decrease, the body will feel fatigued, and then predominantly run off fat stores. So once you're running low on your glucose, and then you've had extra glucose sent, because obviously you've broken that glycogen down in the liver, that's sent off to the blood sent extra glucose to the muscle. When that's running out as well, then your body needs to sort of tune into something else entirely, because you've got no glucose left, and that's when it will start running off your fat stores. Your intensity in your performance levels will decrease because fat cannot be broken down at high intensity levels, and the reason that is because fat can only react with oxygen to be broken down, whereas glucose doesn't necessarily need oxygen to be broken down into energy. And if you're doing things at very high intensities, you're doing them anaerobically, which means without oxygen. Therefore, fat cannot be broken down at these intensity levels. Oh, which brings me on to the final point. Fat cannot be used as an energy source at very high intensities, like sprints or powerlifting, which is one of the reasons why performance decreases over time. So I have just mentioned that, so I won't reiterate that point, and we'll just move on to the next slide. And the reason I didn't reiterate that point on the last slide is because I'm going to reiterate it now with an example. And this example is a marathon runner who is a 70-kilogram male with 15% body fat. Below is a table that has the different types of stores and the amounts stored in this particular individual. So we have the amount of glycogen stored in this individual's liver, the amount of glycogen stored in the muscle, the amount of glucose running through their blood, the amount of fat in certain things like adipose tissue, and the amount of protein stored in this individual's body as well. In the third column, there are some conversions, approximations of what this amount is in calorie content. And in the final slide, this should have approximation signs as well. I apologize. It has been calculated if they were doing a marathon or running at that level of pace, how long it would take for them to burn through this energy. So here you can see it would take them 16 minutes to burn through 306 calories in the liver, 80 minutes for the glycogen in the muscle, etc., etc. One of the things you might have noticed is that despite there being less fat stored than protein, there is a lot more in terms of calories than there is in protein. And that is because of this point here, that 1 gram of protein equals 4 calories, whereas 1 gram of fat equals 9 calories. And because of that, if you add up the mass in total, you're going to get a lot more in terms of energy content out of the fat than you are the protein. During endurance exercise, our bodies will swap between glucose and fat as an energy source. This is the glucose sparing mechanism. This occurs because organs like the brain are dependent on glucose and we have a limited amount stored. Fat, on the other hand, we have stored in abundance. And I'm going to have to pause the video a second because my laptop's battery is running low, so I'm going to have to grab the charger. Okay, I'm back. The glucose sparing mechanism. This occurs during physical activity. If you, let's go with the example, are running a marathon pace. What will happen is at the start of the exercise, you'll primarily be running off glucose. And about 20-30 minutes in, around there roughly, I'd say 30 minutes more than 20, your body will react to the amount of glucose being used up in this given amount of time, because it's going through that glucose relatively quickly, and your body will think, oh my goodness, whoa, our tissues are dependent on glucose, we're going through it quite quickly, let's switch to something else, let's switch to another type of fuel to use as an energy source, let's go to fat because we have fat stored in abundance. So after that, you will continuously switch back and forth between glucose and fat, glucose and fat. It's at marathon pace is kind of known as the sweet spot for burning fat. You could work out at lower intensities and you'd probably tune into your fat stores even more. The only issue with that is let's say you're doing walking instead. That's a great way to burn fat. But to lose weight, you have to be in a calorie deficit, which means you have to expend more calories than you are consuming. If you are walking, it takes a longer amount of time to burn calories than it does from running, for example. So although you may burn more fat, you may go into your fat stores more if you were doing walking because it's a lower intensity than running, you won't burn as many calories in, let's say, an hour as you would from running. For the glucose sparing mechanism to kick in, you have to be working a long time. It can't just be like a 20-minute jog. Again, you will just burn through some glucose. You won't really burn any fat in those calories. If you are going long distance, then you will, or long time, or let's say so you're running for a long time, then you will tune into your fat stores and start burning through those as well as your glucose. You may have read certain articles if you're interested in fitness and weightlifting and all that, and you may have read things where it says certain things like if you work out at an intensity where your heart rate's working at 120 beats per minute to 140 beats per minute, that's the fat burning mode. Or it may be something like if you're working at 70% of your 60 to 70% of your max volume of oxygen capacity, again, you're in the fat burning mode, you'll just burn fat. That is not true. That's a half truth. It is the sweet spot for burning fat, but it won't be the case of, oh, you only burn fat. You still predominantly burn glucose. It's just a case of it switches back and forth between your fat stores and glucose stores. The last thing I want to discuss on this slide are the amounts of minutes that are being used to burn up this amount of energy, because you might be wondering, well, marathons go on for a long time, and these two only add up to about 96 minutes. And I said earlier that once you've depleted your glycogen stores and you tune into your fat stores, your performance decreases due to fatigue. The reason that is because fat only reacts with oxygen to be broken down. Glucose can do both. Glucose can react with or without oxygen. If it reacts with oxygen to create ATP molecules, energy molecules, it's a more efficient process because it creates more ATP molecules. And it's a more efficient fuel source for many reasons. Glucose, one, because it can create more ATP molecules than fat can in one molecule of glucose compared to a molecule of fat. It can also be used quicker because it is stored in the muscle ready to be used, whereas fat, when your body starts using fat, that fat is taken from anywhere. It's not taken specifically here in the, let's say you work in your bicep. It doesn't go, oh, I'm going to use the fat in my bicep. It will just randomly take fat from the adipose tissue. That then has to be shifted into the circulation. It then has to get to the muscle and then be broken down and used as energy. But marathon runners can, like, top elite marathon runners can keep going at a very, very good pace. And the reason that is they go through something called, although I'm sure they're advised by their hired dietitians, nutritionists, to go through something called carbohydrate manipulation. I'm not going to talk about carbohydrate manipulation in this video because it has no relevance to this video, but in the future I will make a video on carbohydrate manipulation. The final slide, applying this to your fitness goals. I'm hoping from this whole video that you've learned new information that you are already able to apply to your health goals, fitness goals, sport goals, nutrition, etc. Especially on the last two slides where we looked at how the body utilizes substrates once it's been through the liver's processes and how it responds to physical activity. This final slide is a roundup of what we've learned and a more direct approach of me telling you how to apply this information to your fitness goals. I'm not going to go over everything in this video. I'm not going to round up on everything we've already talked about. I'm just going to go over some fragments and hopefully, again, provide you with some new information that you can absorb, apply, and hopefully this will be helpful to you. So point number one, carbohydrates are key in your nutrition for optimizing performance levels. Eat enough carbohydrates throughout the day to replenish your muscle glycogen stores. Have carbs before and after workouts. Keto diets / low carb diets will hinder performance, particularly at high intensities, and impact results depending on your goals. So you eat a meal, we've consumed it, it's now got to the liver. Looking at carbohydrates in particular, they've been broken down to glucose. Once the liver has hit max capacity, kicks the rest of the glucose out, sends it to the skeletal muscle. That glucose stored in your skeletal muscle is there to be used during physical activity. Let's say you're in the gym and you're training, you're doing some hypertrophy training, you're doing sets of 10 reps on weights that are a heavy load, got good resistance. Your body is using glucose to fuel that movement. Because it's anaerobic, it's 10 reps, you're building up lactic acid. We've said that fat cannot be broken down without oxygen. So, if you're on a keto diet or a low carb diet, your performance is going to decrease in the gym and you are going to struggle to optimize. Let's say your goal in this instance is building muscle or even retaining muscle. Let's say you're in a calorie deficit and you're wanting to get leaner, but you want to preserve the muscle that you've already built. You do not want to be on a keto diet if you are doing that. I'm not saying keto diets are bad. I'm not saying low carb diets are bad. They have their place, just not here. If your goal is primarily I just want to lose weight, then keto diets, low carb diets, fair enough. That if that's sustainable for you, that's fine. But if you want to preserve muscle, or if you're in the gym and you're wanting to build muscle, you want your carbs. Because what happens is if you're on a keto diet or a low carb diet, and I have done this, I have tried both of these types of diets. You go in the gym, you're doing a set on the squat rack, you're doing squats. Your first set, second set might be all right. You might just get through it. After that, you'll feel fatigued. You'll feel done. You can't be bothered. You want to lower the weight. Or you might just want to go home. You may get through the first one or two workouts, but after that, it'll get. It's just not sustainable. And the thing is, you'll have some glucose because your body goes through processes. Your liver goes through processes like gluconeogenesis, where it converts fat into glucose, but it's not anywhere near as much as if you were consuming carbohydrate and optimizing your glycogen stores in your muscles for then your muscles to use glucose as a fuel source. So that's why you probably can get through a couple of sets and then you'll fatigue after that. It's the same as if you were doing hits. If you were doing like high intensity training and you were doing sprints, your performance would be so much better if you're having carbohydrates in your diet compared to if you're not having them, because you'll get maybe through a couple of sprints and then your performance will decrease so much sooner than it would if you were consuming carbohydrates. And the good thing about carbs as well is so let's say if you are wanting to preserve muscle, you're trying to get lean, when you're in a calorie deficit, your body is going through catabolic processes. It's breaking stuff down to use as energy. What you want is to burn fat, but it's not that straightforward. It doesn't just burn fat and protein, which is muscle essentially. That will also be broken down if it's not getting a good enough resistance. Because when you've got muscle, your muscle needs a reason to stick around. So if you're giving it a good enough resistance, then obviously signals from the brain, we need this muscle because we need to be able to do this movement. If you are on a keto diet or a low carb diet and then you are going to the gym and your performance is decreasing, so either you're not managing to do as many sets or you're not managing to do as many reps or the weight's getting lowered, you're reducing the resistance now. If the resistance gets reduced and you're in a calorie deficit as well, your body's going to start going, well, we don't need this protein, but we need energy. So it'll start breaking down protein and muscle to use as energy. And there are many different reasons why muscle starts breaking down when you're in a calorie deficit and trying to get lean. Training and nutrition should not be one of them. And obviously I've said about particularly at high intensities. Just to reiterate, the reason that fat cannot be used during stuff like weightlifting if you're doing hypertrophy or powerlifting is because those are anaerobic exercises and your fat does not get broken down unless it is reacting with oxygen. Fat cannot go through the metabolic process glycolysis. Only glucose can do that. And glycolysis is an anaerobic metabolic pathway to create energy. If you're only interested in losing weight, then keto and low carb diets are fine, because to lose weight you just need to be in a calorie deficit. But when people say they lose weight, they usually have an image in their head where they're lean, but their body is tight and, as they say, toned, which isn't a real term, but I understand what they're trying to articulate. What they're saying is they want their body to look tight. They want the flabby parts to be gone, and to do that, you've got to build muscle. People associate building muscle with getting huge, and that's not really realistic. You've got to have super genetics if you want to get as big as someone like Arnold Schwarzenegger, and probably use steroids. Building muscle is what will help you put a layer over the fat that is making like certain parts of your skin flabby. So when people say they want to lose weight, usually they mean is they want to get lean, but they want to build a bit of muscle so everything looks tight. If you're on a keto diet, then first of all, you're depleting your glycogen stores. And so you're going to lose weight there. That's why when you get on the scales after a week or two after being on keto or low carbs, your weight's gone down quite significantly. It's because the glycogen stores, the glucose stored in your muscles has been depleted. That's not the type of weight you want to lose. You want to lose fat. You want your glycogen stores full because it gives you that puffier look. It gives you that tighter look. And also carbohydrates contain water. So that's another reason why you lose a lot of weight significantly at the beginning of a keto diet and low carb diet. I think that's everything I wanted to say on that. If not, there'll be future videos. So there'll be a lot of overlap, and there'll also be new things coming up. But anyway, moving on to the final point. The liver is a vital organ to energy metabolism, so try to limit intaking bad substances. Let's try that again. So try to limit intaking bad substances that damage the liver over time. For example, alcohol. I'm not going to list all the negative impacts alcohol has. I'm sure you've been told many times over the years from childhood. I'm going to tell you one that you might know, but I'm going to hope that, well, not hope, but assume that a lot of people watching this won't know. Alcohol negatively impacts your body's ability to absorb glucose. And I'm going to leave you with that because after everything I've just said about glucose, I'm hoping you now realize that's a bad thing. And with that, I'm going to end the video here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the liver part 1 and this second video on the liver part 2, and that you have learned something new. Take care, and I hope to see you again in the next video.